Now let's continue the conversation about neuromarketing and how tech companies can exploit it to stay cool or to try and become cool. Well, joining us now is Duncan Smith, Managing Director and Partner at Mindlab, and Malcolm Gooderham, Managing Partner at TLG. Now, guys, thank you so much for coming in. First of all, Duncan, let's just talk. I mean, Guy did the experiment, which I really want to know the results about.
I'm the guinea pig here.
You were basically
no, it was just
attached.
basically I didn't have to get fully attached up, which was certainly good for my looking cool. It was just on a screen, but basically trying to figure out my response to various stimulus from Apple adverts and from Samsung adverts.
That's our very own Guy Johnson there that you can see on screen.
Yeah.
Talk me through, Duncan, exactly how this works.
Well, neuromarketing itself is a whole range of different disciplines, but what we did here is something called an implicit association test, and what we were actually trying to find out...
Glad that's what it was. Yeah.
Good, I'm glad you know. Or we'll call it IAT from now on.
Yeah.
But this test is literally to look at the strength of associations that you have outside of conscious awareness.
Yeah.
So we wanted to know what you thought about Samsung and Apple in relation to innovation. Now, we could just ask you, which is what we did, and you gave us your answer. But what we did is we sort of probed into your subconscious. So we did a test that basically measures how accurate and how fast you are in doing a sorting activity.
Yeah.
So what we actually did with this activity is we flashed words up on screen and images, and you were just asked to sort them into either left or right-hand side of the screen. It was probably quite laborious.
Yeah, and surprisingly hard, because you've got to be really fast.
Yeah, well,
which is basically trying to take the conscious out of it, I guess.
Exactly. All of the input we need has to be in less than a second. So it's really important that we do pick up something that's in the subconscious and definitely not conscious awareness.
Malcolm, you're a brand man, right? You have these surveys that kind of say which companies are doing well, which are the most recognizable. If we look at data, big data, if we look at figures, does it not give you a better understanding rather than this neurological science, which can be, you can be stressed out, you can be not fast enough, too quick?
Well, I think it's fascinating, and it's a fascinating study. And I think there are a range of factors that come into play when consumers are taking decisions on which products to go for, and their relationship with brands will obviously drive this. And I think that one of the things we've seen is the power of innovation. And I think what we're seeing in Apple sort of versus Samsung now is which brand can innovate the most and actually attract the consumer. And it's interesting, when Samsung at the beginning of the last decade set their new brand strategy, they were really talking about and set their sights on Sony. Now, it's interesting, that's fallen away, and it's now very much about Apple versus Samsung. Now, what's happened there? Have Sony failed to innovate at the same pace? Good question. And I think the challenge for brands like Apple is, when they move from being in that thought leadership position to a market leadership position, is how do they maintain that edge? And that's the big challenge for market leaders. And as we've seen with companies like Kodak, if you fail to innovate, life gets very, very tricky.
When you are looking at a company and trying to understand where it is, talking of the sort of the life cycle evolution of the way brands develop, your data, is it more useful on the way up, or is it more useful to sort of established companies who are trying to figure out kind of what consumers are looking at with their brands? They probably have bigger budgets at that point. Kind of take us through where this is most useful in terms of product life cycle development and brand development.
Well, to be honest, every point is important, because with new product development you really want to understand if you're producing something that people actually want or need. So you need to look at emotions more than just asking people what they think. Equally, it's just as important if you have a brand that's doing particularly well, but in market research you don't quite understand what gives you the competitive edge. You really need to try and drill down to find out what it is that you do good, so you can leverage on that information.
Duncan, can I just pick up on a point? Because it's my understanding that Guy, so out of the two brands, Guy first of all picked Apple. Am I correct?
Yes. By a margin. By
a margin. But then with the, fancy finger thing, neuroscience, actually decided that Samsung was the one that he marginally preferred.
No. Basically, initially I saw Apple as being more innovative, and then after I'd seen the Samsung adverts, I was much more neutral in terms of...
Right, which is kind of what I'm saying. But my point is, if you, first of all, preferred Apple as having more innovation, that's probably the phone you would have bought. So why not look at sales numbers instead of doing this neuroscience marketing?
Well, I suppose that the main aim of what we did with Guy was to look at the effect of the specific advertising message. So we did an initial study to see what does Guy think about Apple and Samsung in relation to innovation. And we did that, and it just showed, as we said earlier, that you're a little bit more of an Apple man than a Samsung man.
Right.
We then showed advertising material, so some stimulus that was aimed to change brand perceptions. We explicitly asked afterwards, what do you think about Apple and Samsung? And you answered exactly the same as before. You didn't see that on a sort of conscious level there was any particular difference in the way that you felt. But straight after watching that video, we noticed that there was a change implicitly in how you felt about the brands.
This is like subliminal changes. Malcolm, does it change the way that, I mean, would you use something like this to look at brands and to kind of decide what brand's cooler when you look at an advertisement?
Well, I think the work that we've done actually takes a slightly different approach and actually identifies the core values and behaviours which actually define a thought leader brand. And the research we've done in America, Asia and Europe, actually Apple keeps coming top of the index of thought leaders, and the core behaviours that drive that position are innovation, integrity, and influence. So I think there's obviously a big premium around the Apple brand, both in terms of its innovation, obviously its consumer-facing relationships. So it'll be interesting to see how Samsung encroach upon that in the next year or so.
Guys, thank you so much for the panel. But before we go, Malcolm, I just wanted to ask you, I know you've identified 3 apps that would make our lives and probably our viewers' lives much easier. I know you're a gadget lover. What are they?
Well, I mean, there's a host of apps out there that people will like, will make their lives slightly easier. The 3 that we selected today was Evernote. I don't know if people are familiar with Evernote, but it's all about sort of helping you
to... Like a digital moleskin.
Exactly right.
This is like the sort of the anti for Francie. She anti-Francie. She's so obsessed with moleskin notebooks that this is just completely anathema.
Yeah, breaking away. Yeah. So I mean, it's brilliant. It's taken off. It allows you to sort of sort your life out online, and it basically works across different devices. Right. So that makes things a lot easier. TripIt is all about travel. Yeah,
travel organization.
Making it a lot easier. And WebEx is for people who want to do their flashy presentations on their iPads, but from a different location.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. We'll go and check them out. Duncan Smith of Mindlab International and Malcolm Gooderham of TLG. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I just can't imagine...
Me with an Evernote. It's me with an Evermoleskin.
Yeah. Or multi-moleskin, I think. The latest is winning its way across the Atlantic as we speak. Now, coming up, talking...